Hello and welcome. This is Corey from Bach Scholar. You need to buy my book, Tempo and Duration in the Music of Bach. I have proven Bach's tempos statistically. So we know Bach's tempos now. And we know that virtuosos will have a hard time accepting this book. Virtuosos will hate this book. This is because virtuosos play whatever speed they want, whenever they want, and they don't think about history. They just play as fast as they want. Well, Bach's music was written in the 18th century. This is the 1700s. Bach died in 1750. It's very well known among music historians that there was a big change that occurred in the first couple decades of the 19th century. And that big change was tempo. Tempo was being sped up, especially with Beethoven. Beethoven was guilty of it. He even admits. Beethoven admits to having abolished tempo ordinary, or tempi ordinary, sort of ordinary standard tempos. Beethoven was opposed to this idea of standard tempos because Beethoven believed that you should just operate according to your own personal fancies and your own personal genius. He said, unfettered genius. That was the words of Beethoven. So Beethoven was can be held responsible for speeding up and slowing down the tempos over those first couple decades of the 1800s. And what happened was music from the 1700s, like music from 100 years prior to that, was being interpreted in an entirely different fashion than the way it was interpreted 100 years prior. Do you see what's happening? So over that course of 100 years or 150 years, tempos just started speeding up dramatically for the fast movements. And then actually many of the slow movements started slowing way down. And so this is a very well-known fact among music historians that the fast tempos started to really speed up, the slow tempos started to really speed down, or slow down. And so what the result was in the Romantic period, in the high Romantic period, like in the mid-1800s to the late 1800s, when Romanticism was at its peak, this is when the tempo extremes were at their peak, the tempo extremes. Now, I can understand, or we can all understand tempo extremes for Wagner and for Liszt and Beethoven. You know, some of these composers where it's appropriate, they're 19th century composers. But Bach, dainty little dance pieces from keyboard suites. I mean, is this really virtuoso music that should be played as fast as possible? I don't think so. No, Bach followed an entirely different aesthetic than that was being followed 100 years after Bach. But here's the problem, is that all the virtuosos of the 19th century that started to basically take Bach's music and just blaspheme it, play it way too fast or way too slow, that it made its way into the 20th century. So now we're in the 20th century, and virtually all pianists in the 20th century who are raised in the 19th century virtuoso tradition misinterpret Bach in terms of tempo. It's just really a travesty. Virtuosos know nothing about music history. Virtuosos really should stay away from Bach suites. Virtuosos should play Variation 26 from Bach's Goldberg Variation slow, because that's what Bach wanted. Variation 26 is not fast. I prove it in this book. Everything is proven in here. In fact, I have a chapter where I discuss the history of tempo in here. And I make it very clear that it was Beethoven's fault for speeding up and slowing down tempos, and then that throughout the 19th century was, taken to its extreme. It carried over to the 20th century. Now we're in the 21st century already, and you have virtuosos, piano virtuosos, playing Bach's works just absolutely ridiculously fast. Just way too fast for a lot of his tempos. These are 19th century tempos applied to 18th century music. It is fully anachronistic. It is not correct. Virtuosos have no place playing Bach, because virtuoso music really began later. Yes, Bach has some difficult things for virtuosos, like his concerto material and things like that. But when you're talking about Bach's suites, little dainty little dance pieces from suites, or